Something I found startling about Intimate Apparel was to find out that George also didn't write the letters to Esther. It was ironic that both Esther and George thought they were communicating with each other, but they had other people actually write them. It was also surprising that Esther gave the money in her quilt to George. It was something I didn't expect her to do. And I thought it was meaningful that Esther went back to her old life at Mrs. Dickerson's and had a moment with Mr. Marks. It was kind of Esther returning to her normal and getting almost back on track with her life. Some of the themes in the play, the first was a racial tie. I think the African American characters were kind of portrayed as working for the white people. Esther was the seamstress for Mrs. Van Buren. Mame was a saloon girl, and even George had difficulty finding a job. He was African American. He was really only a laborer. Another theme would be that love wasn't really real in a lot of aspects. Mrs. Van Buren and her husband had a strained relationship. Esther and George had a difficult time. Mr. Marks was engaged to a woman he had never actually met. It was arranged marriage, so love wasn't really real in any of those relationships. And there was also a theme of dreams. Esther had the dream of owning her own beauty parlor, and Mame had the dream of being a pianist, but the way that the play was structured, they didn't really have the opportunity to achieve those dreams because they were pretty low in society with their jobs. I think that the play reinforces our understanding of the African American experience. Equality was just not present in 1905 for African Americans, so they struggled for jobs and status, and there was stereotypes about the kind of work they could do. And I think that Nottage wanted her play to demonstrate that even though African Americans had less rights and less opportunities than whites, they still had similar dreams and issues with love. Like Mrs. Van Buren and her husband struggled because they didn't really seem to care for each other, which is what Esther and George struggled with, even though they were of a very different race and socioeconomic standing. I also think that stereotypes exist today and against many minority groups. I think they're perpetuated by ignorance and lack of knowledge about others, and that stereotypes can be overcome if we have more of an open mind and learn more about other groups and accept them. I think there's a stereotype today that African Americans are typically more poor and dangerous, and this really isn't founded in truth. There's many African Americans that are well off and extremely safe, and I think if we learned more about the African American culture, we would learn that our stereotypes for them aren't true and aren't really fair. So my two questions about the play are, did Mrs. Van Buren love Esther, or was the kiss more of an emotional gesture because her and her husband were having issues and she didn't really mean it as a love gesture? And why did Esther give George the money from her quilt after knowing he was dishonest, and I would assume that she knew he wasn't actually going to spend it to help better her life and use it to better her dreams?